This is what I get for trusting a damn samurai. I grew up here, you know. Learned to swim in the shallows. Helped build half these homes. Broke my arm falling off the rock wall, trying to impress my wife.
The story of Tenzo is not entirely different from the many stories of tsushima that we have already explored. People from both sides of honorable and respectable backgrounds, deviating from their code, losing themselves, or in Yuna's case, redeeming herself. No one in this game's world walks a straight and narrow path, falling into being labeled one specific thing. Tenzo is no different. He grew up on the island of Iki. He personally helped build many of the homes and villages on the island that the shogun and samurai considered lawless. It was an island that the shogun had no proper control over, with the samurai presence being virtually non-existent, giving the island prominence as a location where raiders, pirates, thieves, or anyone else not wanted by the rulers of Japan can find refuge. In this realm, his own realm, one opposed to the samurai ways and traditions that have forsaken Tenzo for the raider that he was, he would be a prominent face on the island. His reputation as a community builder would extend further as a leader and valiant warrior, albeit not one entirely by his own choice. During the Sakai invasion, or the shogun's initiative to force the island and its inhabitants to bend the knee to his rule, Tenzo would rally to the call of the island's defense, pledging his sword to his fellow raiders who were suffering dearly at the hands of the samurai, and their leader Kazumasa Sakai, who was quickly developing the moniker of the Butcher of Iki. The samurai were here to speak the only language they believed raiders and thieves understood: violence. Tenzo, already having a poor view on the samurai, would come to bitterly resent them and everything they stood for, as they left a trail of death, destruction, and headless bodies in their wake. Some of Tenzo's closest friends, communities he helped to build, would be killed and completely wiped out as punishment for the resistance the island was giving. This would push Tenzo and a group of raiders to set up a trap for Kazumasa Sakai, where he would finally be killed, putting a swift end to the brutality he was unleashing on the islanders. And as we know, the trap would be considered a success as Kazumasa was killed, and with his death, the retreat of the samurai was almost immediately started. It was a victory for the island, and for Tenzo, who was the one to give the Butcher of Iki the final blow. But as with many things during war, it would still come at a cost. The Butcher's death would not mean the hell he brought upon the island is just immediately wiped away. While his death did initiate the evacuation of the samurai, the actions of said samurai and Kazumasa's leadership would leave behind a legacy of fear and intense resentment that would last well over 20 years. No samurai was welcomed on the island, and anyone carrying the surname Sakai would be a dead man walking. By the time the Mongols disembarked and began to spread across the island, killing civilians, capturing slaves, or breaking people's minds down with the eagle's poison, leaving just a small group of raiders holding out in a camp on the coast, what the Mongols were doing is still considered nothing by comparison to everything the samurai did. The land and the people of the island have still not fully healed. If push came to shove, the samurai were still a much bigger threat in their eyes than the Mongols would ever be. Then there's the matter of Kazumasa's son, Jin, who would witness the killing of his father, a traumatic experience that left him feeling guilty and somewhat responsible for his overwhelming fear, paralyzing him and preventing him from saving his father from being killed. Even when Jin grew up and became the mythical legend of the Ghost of Tsushima, completely owning up to the title as the best swordsman on the island, heading to the island of Iki wasn't such an easy decision. The air on the land loomed heavy with the memory of his past, a past he and Tenzo would soon realize had them much more intertwined than they ever knew.
You weren't looking so good. I let you rest.
Who are you? Answer me!
You're used to talking that way to people on Tsushima, but not here, samurai.
I don't even know if you're real.
Draw your blade. Find out how real I am.
The first time Jin and Tenzo make contact with each other is a curious one. Jin is in the middle of suffering the effects of the eagle's poison, during which time Tenzo would arrive, kill the Mongols surrounding Jin, and even helping him escape. He would then let Jin rest peacefully as he stood guard, whether if it's how Jin speaks, demanding Tenzo reveal who he is once he comes to, or maybe it could have been that Tenzo practically knows every raider on the island, and Jin's swords would give him away as someone that's just not from here. Whatever the reason, it's clear Tenzo knows he's a samurai. But instead of taking some kind of belated revenge on this lone samurai or punishing him for what the samurai did to all those people many years ago, Tenzo doesn't let hate or anger dictate how he acts towards Jin. Of course, both sides are naturally wary of each other, but not to the point of actual hostility. Jin would reveal himself as Jin from Yarakawa, giving up he is indeed a samurai, while masking his identity as the butcher's son, buying him some kind of safety that would befall the son of the butcher, while giving him just enough freedom to act in a way that wouldn't be too suspicious had he claimed he was a pirate or smuggler that was marooned on the island. Tenzo would inform Jin that most of the resistance on the island had been completely wiped out, with the exception of a small hideout he and some other raiders had been using to continue the resistance. Jin would offer his support to help the raiders' cause, to which Tenzo is doubtful, but he does tell Jin if he actually means what he says, he can find him at an old farmhouse on the western coast of the island. This interaction is laced with doubt and tension. Between the two of them, Tenzo is actually more of a peaceful character. Jin appears to be much more confrontational and effective from the time he was last on this island. To be fair to him, he was coming down from the eagle's poison, forcing him to relive the pain and trauma of his father's death. Once the effects more or less subside, he even says it's difficult to tell if Tenzo is real or not. However, for Tenzo, it speaks to his character of being a leader first and a warrior second. Past transgressions are not forgotten, but there's a bigger, more novel threat to the island. As Jin begins to follow Tenzo, he'll come to see that there's many sides to this man. He's religious, as he speaks a prayer for some friends who were killed by the Mongols. He also gave up his house, his clothes, and anything else he could do to help the sick and the wounded, having an active role building the island's communities, watching them to then get destroyed during what he called the Sakai invasion, rebuilding these communities again to now witnessing the eagle's poison hit the community in a way that none of them have ever seen before. Recruiting Jin was the best move, even if it put him in a position that would have resulted in other smugglers and raiders wanting him dead for putting them all in the vulnerable position of bringing in the samurai. It was really up to Jin, who had to prove himself as having the same interests in mind as the raiders, to ensure the defeat of the Mongols and place the island back within the raiders' control. This is something Jin would actually end up doing with resounding success, gaining the trust of even Fune. By all accounts, it appeared it was a perfect alliance that was on track to somewhat rebuild the incredibly negative and in some parts of the island downright terrifying view of the samurai. Unfortunately, it was an alliance and series of events that seemed almost too perfect. The trust Jin would gain with his unlikely allies was undermined heavily when his true identity was learned by Tenzo.
Lord Sakai. One whisper of your real name, and every person in this refuge will line up to split you wide open. These people are my family. If they find out I brought the butcher of Iki-san here, they'll stake both of us down, make us a feast for the crabs.
I won't let that happen. This stays between us.
Before, it was Tenzo's decision to trust Jin. If anything went wrong, his fellow smugglers may blame him, but it wasn't to the point of demanding his head. Now, if anyone discovered Tenzo had revealed everything about the smugglers to the son of the butcher of Iki, the island's sworn enemy, he would be dead too for swearing by him. Whether if he liked it or not, Tenzo's fate was now tied to Jin's, who was continuing to suffer the effects of the eagle's poison. Every moment he interacted and plotted with these raiders, his thoughts and feelings of congregating with what was previously an enemy that had been responsible for the death of his father were only getting louder and magnified by the poison. Every new location, every new interaction, new conversation between Jin, Tenzo, Fune, all resurrected feelings of pain, anger, doubt, confusion, and embarrassment of what his father would think. When Jin, Tenzo, and Fune decide to plan out a defense to ambush the Mongols at Kirafire village, everything would begin to unravel for Tenzo and Jin.
You knew who I was, what you did to my father. You lied to my face.
You lied to yourself. Your father was my enemy, not you.
How did someone so worthless defeat Kazumasa Sakai?
Kirafire village is an infamous location. It's a site where the samurai unleashed its most heinous atrocities across all of Iki. They slaughtered smugglers that were hiding here as well as entire families as punishment for providing refuge for any raiders. It didn't matter if the families were personally involved with helping the raiders or not. The entire village suffered. Men, women, and children were killed, and the entire village was razed to the ground. Tenzo would lose a close friend here, telling Jin it took him a whole week to find his friend's severed head in the mud. Jin was actually here as well. He witnessed firsthand the entire attack go down, even telling his father what they were doing here didn't feel like a victory. He doesn't tell Tenzo about being here, but it's a moment where the two of them get a better understanding that neither of them nor the sides they represented back during the war were entirely faultless or without loss. Tenzo would chastise Jin for not doing anything about everything his father was doing. All the lives he took, all the death and destruction ongoing simply because Jin refused to stand up to his father. Jin would simply respond by telling him he would change things if he could. He regrets how everything turned out, but he did watch his father die. He had a chance to save him, but he didn't. Tenzo knows everything that happened that day. As a matter of fact, he's the man that even killed Jin's father. He would very curiously ask Jin why he didn't save Kazumasa, but the conversation would be quickly interrupted by a Mongol attack.
Do you know how many lives your father destroyed?
Too many. If I could change that, I would.
But you didn't. Others had to end his cruelty.
And I watched him die. I could have saved him. But I didn't.
Why not?
It's interesting to give some thought to what Tenzo may have been thinking in this moment. Knowing Jin had a chance to save his father that night, how different things would have been if Jin had the courage to stop hiding and fight for his father's survival. Perhaps Tenzo would be killed, or both Jin and his father would be 6 feet under, completely eliminating the Sakai bloodline, and hence 20 years later during the Mongol invasion, removing the only hope the raiders have at fighting back against the Mongols. Jin would continue to prove his alliance to the raiders and their cause, helping them secure their victory at Kirafira village, in some ways symbolically redeeming his father's atrocities at this very site. But as the Mongol survivors are being wiped out, he hears an old prayer be said, one that has haunted him for over 20 years.
May your death benefit all beings. Jin?
This whole time, Tenzo's known who Jin was, but for the first time, Jin knows who exactly Tenzo is. The man who killed his father. The man who he's been haunted by, reminding him every single day since then of his failure to save his father. Jin is filled with anger, finally putting a face to the man who took everything from him so long ago. While Jin is consumed by rage, I've always felt Tenzo completely steals the show here. He just accepts his fate. He admits even knowing who Jin was, but he never looked at him as his enemy. His father was, and his father was killed a long time ago. He also accepts being called someone as worthless. To me, that provides more insight to Tenzo as more of a community builder and less of a warrior. While he may have hated the samurai and Kazumasa for everything they did to him and his people, he didn't bask in the glory of taking out this monster, claiming he was a glorious warrior or the savior of Iki. Instead, he speaks of how he just got lucky. Kazumasa was injured and he killed many men while his leg was broken. Tenzo was just at the right place at the right time to finish the job that they all started collectively. But if this is Jin's decision, finish the job. Just as Tenzo saw the benefit in sparing and recruiting Jin when they first met, the tables are now turned. Jin would utilize Tenzo's knowledge of Senjo Gorge, the site where a trap was set up for the butcher of Iki 20 years ago, would be replicated and used on the Mongols and their leader, the Eagle. Once they're dealt with, then there's the matter of figuring out what's best to do between Tenzo and Jin, who now was more than happy to let everyone know who exactly he was, feeling confident that he's got the support of Fune and all the smugglers behind him. After the many successes he's already secured to the raiders, there was no more secrets between Jin or them. The final showdown between the Eagle and Jin, we would see Jin finally come to terms with everything his father has done, all the horrors he brought upon the island, and finally forgiving himself for not saving his father. As he says, the way Kazumasa chose to live wasn't his choice, nor was his death Jin's fault. He rejects the rage and path of vengeance, and finally fully snap out of the effects of the Eagle's poison, and come to just in time to save Tenzo's life. Interestingly, when he kills the Eagle, he recites the same prayer Tenzo did when he killed Kazumasa, symbolically forgiving his father's killer while adding significance to the history of the island. It's almost as if this prayer is now tied to freeing the island from the grip of an oppressor, as a blessing to cleanse the land, so to speak. Tenzo and Jin's story would end with the two of them apologizing for everything. Jin forgives Tenzo, while Tenzo, Fune, and many of the smugglers can come to believe not all samurai are bad, especially not everyone from the Sakai bloodline is completely hell-bent on law and order. Jin would tell Tenzo he's glad he met him, while Tenzo would bow and thank Jin for all he's done. Tenzo would comment on how he's going to resign himself to helping whoever was still affected by the Eagle's poison, guide them through traumatic memories, and help them heal. And that's the last we hear of him. That's the story of Tenzo, a no-named raider who helped build Iki Island before as well as in between wars. The killer of Kazumasa Sakai was also the first and most beneficial ally Jin was able to establish on the island.